The black Mercedes sedan sat motionless on the shoulder of Highway 207, its hazard lights blinking a desperate rhythm against the vast Montana sky. Steam rose from under the hood in thin, ghostly wisps, and the rear passenger tire had given up. Completely shredded rubber scattered across the asphalt like confetti from a celebration no one wanted to attend. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Victoria Hartwell stepped out of the driver's seat, her charcoal business suit pristine, despite the circumstances, her platinum hair pulled back in a severe bun that hadn't moved despite the wind whipping across the open plains. She stood there for a moment, hands on her hips, staring at the tire as if her gaze alone could repair it. The silence stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Her phone showed no signal. Of course, the irony wasn't lost on her. She commanded million-dollar aircraft, navigated complex international airspace, and managed a fleet of corporate jets. But here she stood, defeated by a simple flat tire on a road that seemed to lead nowhere. The sun was already beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. She'd been driving for hours, trying to clear her head after the confrontation at the board meeting, trying to make sense of the accusations that had been thrown at her like stones. Now, stranded between two small towns she'd never heard of, with her phone dead and her tire destroyed, she felt more isolated than she had in years. That's when she heard the rumble of an engine approaching from behind, a faded blue pickup truck. Its paint weathered by years of Montana winters and summers, slowed as it approached. The driver downshifted, and Victoria could hear the slight squeal of brakes that needed attention. The truck pulled over about 20 feet behind her car, and for a moment, nothing happened. Just the tick of cooling metal and the whisper of wind. Through the grass, the driver's door opened with a creak that spoke of age and hard use. A man stepped out, tall and lean, wearing work boots that had seen better decades and jeans that were clean but faded. His flannel shirt was rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms marked by years of honest work. He looked to be in his early 30s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges and eyes the color of storm clouds. He approached slowly, not in a way that suggested hesitation, but with the careful consideration of someone who understood that a woman alone on a deserted road might be wary of strangers. His movements were economical, purposeful, like a man who had learned not to waste energy on unnecessary gestures. "Looks like you've got some trouble," he said when he was still a respectful distance away. His voice was quiet, steady, with the slight drawl that came from growing up in Big Sky country. Victoria studied him for a moment. There was something about his demeanor that put her at ease. The way he kept his hands visible, the way he didn't approach too quickly, the way his eyes met hers directly without the calculating look she'd grown accustomed to in boardrooms and hangars. "That would be an understatement," she replied, gesturing toward the destroyed tire. "I've been here for over an hour." Angelo Martinez looked at the Mercedes, taking in the expensive leather interior visible through the open door, the spotless chrome, the way the car seemed to gleam even in the dusty twilight. But when his eyes returned to hers, there was no judgment in them, no assumption or calculation. Just the simple recognition of one human being helping another. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked. She nodded, stepping aside as he approached the vehicle. He didn't touch anything at first, just crouched down beside the destroyed tire, examining the damage with the practiced eye of someone who had seen plenty of roadside emergencies. The tire hadn't just gone flat, it had been shredded, probably, by road debris or a sharp rock, and the wheel itself had been damaged in the process. "When did you last check your spare?" he asked, standing and brushing the dust from his hands. "Honestly, I don't even know if I have one," Victoria admitted. The confession felt strange on her lips. She was a woman who planned for every contingency. In the air, who ran pre-flight checks with military precision, who never left anything to chance. But this car was a rental. She'd been so focused on escaping the chaos of her professional life that she hadn't given a thought to mundane details like spare tires. Angelo nodded, no judgment in his expression. He walked to the trunk, which was already open, and began moving aside the expensive luggage to reveal the spare tire compartment. What he found wasn't encouraging. The spare was there, but it was one of those temporary donuts that wouldn't get her very far, and it was nearly flat itself. "Well," he said, straightening up, "the good news is you've got a spare. The bad news is it's not going to get you where you're going." Victoria felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She'd been driving aimlessly for hours, trying to process the events of the day, trying to figure out her next move. Now she was stranded, dependent on the kindness of a stranger, feeling more helpless than she had since she was a child. "There's a gas station about 15 miles up the road," Angelo continued, his voice calm and reassuring. "If I can get this spare inflated and mounted, it'll get you that far. They've got a decent tire shop there. It's run by my cousin Miguel. He'll take care of you." "You don't have to do this," Victoria said. Though even as she said it, she knew she needed his help. "I can call a tow truck or something." Angelo glanced at her phone, which she was holding uselessly in her hand. "Not much signal out here," he observed. "And even if you could call, it'd be hours before anyone showed up. This stretch of road doesn't see much traffic." As if to emphasize his point, they both looked up and down the empty highway. In the distance, heat waves shimmered off the asphalt, and the only signs of life were the occasional meadowlark calling from the grassland, and the endless dance of wind through the prairie grass. Angelo walked back to his truck and retrieved a small compressor and a basic toolkit. The compressor was old, but well maintained, and his tools showed the wear of frequent use. He worked with quiet efficiency, not bothering with small talk or unnecessary explanations. Victoria found herself watching him as he worked, noting the way he moved with purpose and care, the way he treated her expensive car with the same respect he would have shown his own vehicle. "You do this often?" she asked, as he connected the compressor to the spare tire. "Help stranded motorists?" He glanced up at her briefly, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "More often than you'd think. This road can be hard on cars, especially ones that aren't used to the conditions out here." The compressor hummed to life, and slowly the spare tire began to take shape. While they waited, Victoria found herself stealing glances at this unexpected Good Samaritan. There was something about him that was different from the men. She usually encountered the executives and pilots and businessmen who seemed to always want something, who measured every interaction in terms of potential advantage. "Name?" she asked suddenly. "Angelo," he replied, checking the tire pressure. "Angelo Martinez, Victoria Hartwell." She extended her hand and he shook it briefly, his grip firm and honest. "I should probably mention that I have no idea how to thank you for this." "No need," Angelo said, beginning the process of jacking up the car. "I've got a daughter. If she was ever stranded somewhere, I'd hope someone would stop to help her." The mention of his daughter added another layer to Victoria's understanding of this man. She found herself wondering about his story, about the life that it shaped him into someone who would stop for a stranger without hesitation. But she didn't ask. Something about his manner suggested he wasn't someone who shared personal details easily. The work took about 30 minutes. Angelo replaced the destroyed tire with the spare, though he made it clear that this was a temporary solution at best. The donut tire looked impossibly small and fragile compared to the heavy-duty tires the Mercedes had been designed for. "This'll get you to Miguel's place," he said, lowering the jack and beginning to pack up his tools. "But don't push it. Keep it under 50, and don't try to go too far." Victoria looked at the temporary tire, then at Angelo, who was wiping his hands on an old rag. His clothes were now dusty from the work, and there was a smudge of dirt on his cheek, but he seemed completely unaware of his appearance. She reached into her purse, pulling out her wallet. "Please," she said, "let me pay you for your time." Angelo held up a hand, stepping back slightly. "No need for that. But you've saved me hours of waiting, maybe even having to spend the night out here. That has to be worth something." He shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips. "Sometimes helping someone is worth more than money." The simplicity of the statement hit Victoria like a physical blow. In her world, everything had a price. Every favor came with an expectation of reciprocity. The idea that someone would help purely out of kindness, without expecting anything in return, was so foreign to her experience that she found herself momentarily speechless. Angelo finished packing his tools and walked back to his truck. He paused, with his hand on the door handle, looking back at her. "You be careful on that spare," he said. "And tell Miguel that Angelo sent you. He'll take good care of you." "Angelo?" Victoria called out as he started to get into his truck.
"Thank you."
"Really?" He nodded once, a simple acknowledgement, and then he was gone, his truck disappearing down the highway in a cloud of dust and exhaust. Victoria stood there for a long moment, watching until the red tail lights were just pinpricks in the distance. Then she got back into her car and carefully pulled back onto the highway as she drove slowly toward the gas station. The spare tire making an odd humming sound against the asphalt, she found herself thinking about Angelo Martinez. There had been something about him that had caught her off guard, something she couldn't quite name. In a world where everyone seemed to want something from her, where every interaction was calculated and transactional, he had simply helped and walked away. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The gas station appeared ahead, its neon sign flickering in the gathering dusk. Miguel's Garage and Service Station, the sign read, and as Angelo had promised, the tire shop was still open. She pulled carefully into the parking lot, the spare tire finally giving up the ghost with a soft sigh as she came to a stop. Miguel Hernandez turned out to be a younger version of Angelo. With the same quiet competence and the same genuine smile, when she mentioned that Angelo had sent her, his face lit up. "My primo Angelo," he said with obvious affection. "Always sending people my way. Good man, that one. Raised his little girl all by himself after his wife passed. Works 3 jobs to make ends meet, but he'll still stop to help a stranger on the road." Victoria felt something twist in her chest at this casual revelation. Angelo was a widower, a single father, working multiple jobs, and yet he had stopped to help her without a second thought, without expecting anything in return. The contrast between his life and hers, between his generosity and the calculating world she inhabited, was stark and unsettling. As Miguel worked on fitting a new tire to her car, Victoria found herself staring out at the darkening sky, thinking about a man named Angelo Martinez, who had appeared when she needed help most and had asked for nothing in return. She had dealt with corporate executives and government officials, billionaires and celebrities, but she couldn't remember the last time someone had surprised her the way he had. The tire was fixed within an hour, and Victoria paid Miguel, tipping him generously despite his protests. As she prepared to leave, she found herself hesitating. "Angelo," she said to Miguel, "does he live around here?" Miguel nodded, born and raised. "His daughter goes to Clearwater Elementary, about 10 miles north of here. Sweet little girl, smart as a whip. She's the light of his life." Victoria nodded, filing away this information without quite understanding why. She thanked Miguel again and drove away into the night, but she couldn't shake the image of Angelo Martinez from her mind. Something about their brief encounter had left an impression that went deeper than simple gratitude. As she finally reached the hotel where she'd made a reservation, Victoria found herself making a mental note of Clearwater Elementary. She told herself it was just idle curiosity, but deep down, she knew it was something more. Angelo Martinez had shown her something she'd forgotten existed. Genuine human kindness with no strings attached. And somehow, she knew their story wasn't over. Victoria woke before dawn in her hotel room, the kind of restless awakening that comes when the mind refuses to quiet itself. She'd barely slept, her thoughts circling back to the encounter on Highway 287, like a moth drawn to flame. Through the thin hotel curtains, she could see the first pale fingers of sunrise stretching across the Montana sky, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. She'd spent years perfecting the art of compartmentalization, of filing away personal feelings in favor of professional focus. But something about Angelo Martinez had disrupted that carefully maintained order. As she stood at the window with a cup of mediocre hotel coffee, she found herself thinking not about the board meeting that had driven her to flee Denver, not About the accusations of mismanagement and the whispered rumors of corporate espionage. But about a man who had fixed her tire and asked for nothing in return. By 7 in the morning, Victoria had made a decision that would have seemed impossible. Just 24 hours earlier, instead of heading directly back to Denver to face the corporate wolves circling her company, she was going to find Angelo Martinez and thank him properly. It was the least she could do, she told herself, though she knew the truth was more complicated than simple gratitude. Clearwater Elementary. School sat on the edge of town like a small beacon of hope against the vast Montana landscape. The building was single-story brick, probably built in the 1970s. With a playground that had seen better decades, but was maintained with obvious care. A hand-painted sign out front announced home of the Fighting Mustangs in slightly faded blue letters. And the flagpole in the circular drive flew both the American flag and the Montana state flag with equal pride. Victoria parked across the street, feeling oddly nervous about what she was planning to do. She'd commandeered military airfields and negotiated landing rights at international airports. But the thought of walking into a small-town elementary school made her palms sweat. She checked her appearance in the rearview mirror, smoothing down her hair and adjusting her blazer. The business attire that gave her confidence in boardrooms suddenly felt out of place here. The morning rush was in full swing. Parents in pickup trucks and modest sedans were dropping off children who burst. From car doors like springs released, backpacks bouncing as they ran toward the school entrance. Victoria watched this daily ritual with fascination, noting the easy familiarity between parents and teachers. The way everyone seemed to know everyone else. That's when she saw him. Angelo's blue pickup truck pulled into the circular drive. Victoria felt her breath catch. He looked different in the morning light, younger somehow, though the worry lines around his eyes suggested he carried burdens that had aged him beyond his years. He was wearing a clean white t-shirt and the same work boots from the night before. And when he stepped out of the truck, Victoria could see that he moved with the careful economy of someone who had learned to preserve energy for the long day ahead. But it was the little girl who emerged from the passenger side that made Victoria's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. She was maybe 8 or 9 years old, with her father's dark hair braided neatly down her back, and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and mischief. She wore a backpack that was almost too big for her small frame, decorated with patches and pins that spoke of interests ranging from astronomy to soccer. "Daddy, you forgot to pack my lunch again," the girl said, her voice carrying clearly across the morning air. There was no accusation in her tone, just the patient resignation of a child who had learned to be more responsible than her years should require. Angelo's face flushed with embarrassment and guilt. "Mia, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Was thinking about the Henderson job, and it's okay," Mia interrupted, reaching up to pat her father's arm with a gesture so mature it broke Victoria's heart. "Mrs. Peterson always has extra sandwiches. She says growing kids need proper nutrition even if their daddies are forgetful sometimes." Victoria watched as Angelo knelt down to his daughter's level, his large hands gentle as he adjusted her backpack. Straps and smoothed the wayward strand of hair behind her ear. "You're too good to your old man, you know that?" Mia grinned, revealing a gap where she'd recently lost a tooth. "I know. Somebody has to take care of you." The exchange was so tender, so filled with the kind of love that transcended circumstances, that Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. She'd grown up in a world of nannies and boarding schools, where affection was scheduled and emotions were considered inconvenient. The simple, unguarded love between this father and daughter was something she'd never experienced firsthand. Angelo stood up, checking his watch with the expression of a man constantly racing against time. "I've got to get to the Morrison Ranch for the morning shift, then the garage this afternoon. Mrs. Henderson next door will pick you up after school, okay?" "I know the routine, Daddy," Mia said patiently. "Same as always, right?" Angelo seemed to realize he was repeating information his daughter already knew. Another sign of a man juggling too many responsibilities at once. "I'll try to be home for dinner, but if the job runs late, I can make mac and cheese," Mia said matter-of-factly. "The kind from the box that you actually know how to make." Angelo laughed, the sound rich and warm despite the underlying stress. "What did I do to deserve you?" Got lucky, I guess, Mia replied with the serious consideration of a child who had given the matter real thought. Victoria watched as Angelo hugged his daughter goodbye, the embrace lasting just a moment longer than necessary, as if he was trying to store up enough love to carry him through the long day ahead. Mia waved as she ran toward the school entrance, her backpack bouncing with each step, and Angelo stood watching until she disappeared through the doors. Only then did he notice Victoria. She had gotten out of her car without quite realizing it. Drawn by the scene playing out before her, she stood on the sidewalk across the street feeling exposed and uncertain. Angelo's expression shifted from surprise to concern as he recognized her. Ms. Hartwell walked toward her, his brow furrowed with worry. Is everything okay? Did something happen with the tire? No, the tire's fine, Victoria said quickly. Miguel took good care of me, just like you said he would. Angelo reached the sidewalk where she stood. Victoria was struck again by his presence, by the way he seemed to carry himself with quiet dignity, despite the obvious strain of his circumstances. Up close, she could see the small details that spoke of his life, the calluses on his hands, the faint scar on his forearm, the way his clothes were clean but worn. Then what brings you to Clearwater? He asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice, as if the idea of someone like her being in his neighborhood was as unlikely as snow in July. Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. She'd rehearsed this moment during the drive over. But now that she was here, facing him, all her carefully planned words seemed inadequate. I wanted to thank you properly, she said finally. What you did yesterday, stopping to help a complete stranger, it meant more than you know. Angelo looked puzzled. I told you, there's no need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same. No, Victoria said firmly. They wouldn't have. Trust me on that. There was something in her tone that made Angelo study her more carefully, as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time. The expensive clothes, the manicured appearance, the way she carried herself, all of it spoke of a world very different from his own. You're not from around here, he said, and it wasn't a question. Denver, Victoria replied. I was... passing through. Long way to pass through, Angelo observed. Not much between here and there except empty road, Victoria nodded, not trusting herself to explain the real reason she'd been on that highway. Fleeing from accusations she couldn't defend, in a life that had suddenly felt like a trap. Your daughter is beautiful, she said, changing the subject. She seems very mature for her age. Angelo's expression softened immediately, the way it always did when Mia was mentioned. She's had to grow up faster than I would have liked. Lost her mom when she was 5, and it's been just the two of us ever since. The casual mention of such profound loss hit Victoria like a physical blow. She'd sensed tragedy in Angelo's quiet strength, but hearing it confirmed made her chest tight with sympathy. I'm sorry, she said, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. Thank you. Angelo's acceptance of her condolences was simple and dignified. It's been 3 years now. We've learned to take care of each other. Victoria thought about the scene she'd just witnessed. The easy love between father and daughter, the way Mia had comforted her father about the forgotten lunch with the patience of someone far older than her years. She takes care of you, Victoria said, remembering Mia's words. Angelo smiled. And for the first time since she'd met him, the expression reached his eyes completely. She does. Sometimes I think she's the parent, and I'm the kid who can't remember to pack lunches. The admission was made without self-pity. It's just the honest acknowledgement of a man doing his best in circumstances that had been thrust upon him. Victoria found herself comparing this to the men in her world, who complained bitterly about minor inconveniences while having every aspect of their lives managed by assistants and staff. The 3 jobs, Victoria said, remembering what Miguel had mentioned. That must be exhausting. Angelo shrugged. You do what you have to do. Ranch work in the mornings, garage in the afternoons, security guard at the Industrial Park 3. Nights a week, Mia's worth every hour of it. The matter-of-fact way he described his grinding schedule made Victoria's own complaints about corporate stress seemed petty by comparison. She was trying to figure out how to respond when her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed her assistant's name, and she declined the call without hesitation. Important call? Angelo asked, noticing her dismissive gesture. Not anymore, Victoria said, and realized she meant it. They stood in comfortable silence, for a moment, watching as the last few stragglers hurried into the school building. The morning was warming up, and somewhere in the distance, Victoria could hear the sound of a lawnmower starting up, the normal sounds of a small town going about its daily business. I should let you get to work, Victoria said finally, though. She found herself reluctant to end the conversation. Angelo nodded, but he didn't move immediately. Can I ask you something? Of course. Yesterday, when I found you on the road, you looked like you were running from something. I hope whatever. It was, you're okay. The question was asked with such genuine concern that Victoria felt tears threaten again. In her world, personal problems were weaknesses to be exploited, vulnerabilities that could be used against you. The idea that this near stranger would worry about her well-being, would take the time to ask, was almost overwhelming. I'm working on being okay, she said honestly. Angelo nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Sometimes that's all you can do. You take it one day at a time. Is that what you did? After your wife? The question slipped out before Victoria could stop herself, too personal and intrusive for someone she barely knew. But Angelo didn't seem offended. For a while it was 1 hour at a time, he said quietly. Then 1 day at a time. Now sometimes I can manage a whole week without falling apart. The honesty of his answer, the willingness to admit vulnerability without shame, was unlike anything Victoria had experienced in her professional life. Men in her world armored themselves with aggression and bravado, never admitting weakness or uncertainty. I should go, Angelo said, checking his watch again. Mr. Morrison doesn't like it when his hands are late, and I can't afford to lose this job. Of course, Victoria said quickly. I didn't mean to keep you. You didn't keep me, Angelo assured her. It was good to see you again. I'm glad everything worked out with the tire. Turned to walk back to his truck, and Victoria found herself calling after him, Angelo? He paused, looking back at her expectantly. If you ever need anything, she said, I mean it. Anything at all. Angelo smiled, the expression warm but slightly puzzled. I appreciate that, Ms. Hartwell, but I think you've got enough on your plate without worrying about me and Mia. As his truck pulled away from the school, Victoria remained standing on the sidewalk, watching until it disappeared around a corner. She felt changed by the encounter, though she couldn't quite articulate how. Something about Angelo Martinez and his daughter had shown her a different way of living, a different set of priorities that made her own life seem hollow by comparison. Her phone buzzed again, and this time she answered. Victoria? Where the hell are you? Her assistant's voice was sharp with stress. The board meeting has been moved up. They want to see you at 2 o'clock. Victoria looked at the elementary school, at the small town stretching out before her, at the mountains rising in the distance like ancient guardians. For the first time in her professional life, the urgent demands of her corporate world seemed insignificant compared to what she'd just witnessed. Reschedule it, she said. What? Victoria, you can't reschedule. This is about the Houston contract, about the accusations, then let them wait, Victoria said and hung up. She stood there for another moment, breathing in the clean Montana air, thinking about a man who worked 3 jobs to support his daughter and still stopped to help strangers on the road. Something was happening to her, something she didn't fully understand yet. But she knew with absolute certainty that her life was about to change direction. The question was whether she had the courage to let it happen. Victoria spent the rest of the morning driving aimlessly through the back roads of Montana, her phone buzzing incessantly with calls she refused to answer. Each ring felt like a chain trying to drag her back to a life that suddenly seemed foreign and exhausting. Instead, she found herself drawn to the rhythm of small-town life, watching farmers tend their fields and children play in yards that stretched endlessly under the vast sky. It was nearly noon when she pulled into Henderson's Feed and Hardware, a weathered building that looked like it had been serving the community since the dawn of time. The parking lot was gravel, and her Mercedes looked absurdly out of place among the pickup trucks and farm vehicles. But Victoria was beginning to care less about fitting in and more about understanding this world that Angelo inhabited. Inside, the store smelled of leather, grain, and motor oil. The aisles were narrow and packed with everything from veterinary supplies to children's toys, organized according to some logic that escaped her but clearly made sense to the locals who navigated the space with easy familiarity. Victoria found herself studying the bulletin board near the register, which was covered with job postings, items for sale, and community announcements. "You lost, honey?" The voice belonged to a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that missed nothing. Her name tag read Dolores Henderson. "Actually, I'm looking for information about someone," Victoria said, feeling awkward about her request. "Angelo Martinez. I met him yesterday and I wanted to thank him for helping me with a flat tire." Dolores's expression softened immediately. "Angelo. Well, you couldn't find a better man in 3 counties. That boy's been through more than his share, but he never lets it make him bitter." She leaned against the counter, clearly settling in for a conversation. "You must be the lady from Mercedes. Miguel called this morning and said Angelo sent someone over for a tire replacement." Victoria nodded, surprised by how quickly news traveled in a small town. "He refused to let me pay him for his help." "That sounds like Angelo," Dolores said with a knowing smile. "He's been helping folks around here since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. His mama raised him right before she passed, and even after all the troubles he's had, he never forgot those lessons." "The troubles?" Victoria asked, though she wasn't sure she had the right to pry into Angelo's private life. Dolores's expression grew serious. Losing Sarah was hard enough, but the medical bills nearly broke him. Insurance didn't cover near what it should have, and Angelo took on every debt without complaint. Been working himself to the bone ever since, trying to pay it all off while raising that sweet little girl of his. Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. Medical bills, of course. In her world, health problems were minor inconveniences solved by the best specialists money could buy. She'd never considered what it might be like to lose someone you loved while simultaneously being buried under debt that would take years to repay. "How much?" she asked quietly. Dolores raised an eyebrow. "How much what, honey? How much does he still owe?" "Oh, that's not my place to say," Dolores replied, though her expression suggested she knew exactly what Victoria was thinking. "But I will tell you this. Angelo Martinez has never asked for charity, and he wouldn't take it if it was offered. Pride runs deep in that family." Victoria nodded, filing away this information.
Yes.
She thanked Dolores and left the store, but her mind was racing. She sat in her car for a long moment, staring at her phone, knowing she could make a few calls and have Angelo's financial situation resolved by the end of the day. But she also knew, instinctively, such an approach would destroy whatever fragile connection had formed between them. Her phone rang again. This time she saw a number she couldn't ignore, her lawyer. "Victoria, thank God," came the familiar voice of Marcus Webb. "I've been trying to reach you for hours. We need to talk about the Houston situation." "What about it?" Victoria asked, though she was only half listening. Through the windshield, she could see the mountains in the distance, their peaks snow-capped and eternal. "The board is claiming you violated protocol by using company aircraft for personal business. They're saying the trip to Houston was unauthorized, that you exceeded your authority as CEO." Victoria's attention snapped back to the conversation.
That's ridiculous.
"I've taken company planes for business trips hundreds of times. I know that, and you know that, but they're building a case for gross misconduct. Combined with the questions about the Morrison account, they're trying to remove you for cause." The Morrison account. Victoria closed her eyes, remembering the mess of accusations and innuendo that had driven her to flee Denver in the first place. Someone had leaked confidential information to a competitor, costing her company a multi-million-dollar contract. The board was looking for someone to blame, and as CEO, she was the obvious target. "Marcus, I need you to buy me some time," she said. "How long can you stall them? Maybe a week, 2 at the outside. But Victoria, you need to get back here and fight this. Hiding out wherever you are isn't going to solve anything." After she hung up, Victoria sat in the parking lot of Henderson's Feed and Hardware, feeling the weight of 2 different worlds pressing down on her. In one world, she was a corporate executive fighting for her professional life, facing accusations that could destroy her career and reputation. In the other, she was simply a woman who had been helped by a kind stranger. Someone who was beginning to question everything she'd thought was important. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Ms. Hartwell. This is Mia. Martinez, Daddy gave me your number in case of an emergency. Can you help us? Victoria's heart stopped. Immediately called the number, and a young voice answered on the first ring. Ms. Hartwell, thank you for calling back so fast. Mia, what's wrong? Are you hurt? Where's your father? I'm okay, Mia said quickly, but Daddy got hurt at work. Mrs. Henderson was supposed to pick me up from school, but she had to go to the hospital instead. The school called Daddy's work, but they said he can't come get me because he's in the emergency room. Victoria was already starting her car. Which hospital, sweetheart? Clearwater General? It's the only one in town. Mrs. Peterson from school said she could drive me, but I thought maybe. Daddy said you were nice, and he helped you yesterday. I'm on my way, Victoria said firmly. Don't worry about anything. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The drive to Clearwater Elementary felt like the longest 10 minutes of Victoria's life. She found herself gripping the steering wheel tightly, worried about both Angelo and his daughter. When she arrived, she saw a small figure sitting on the front steps of the school, a backpack beside her and an expression far too serious for a child her age. Mia looked up as Victoria approached, and despite the circumstances, she managed a small smile. You came? Of course I came, Victoria said, kneeling down to Mia's level. Are you okay? Do you know what happened to your dad? Mrs. Henderson said he fell off a roof at the Morrison Ranch. She didn't know how bad it was, just that the ambulance came. Mia's voice was steady, but Victoria could see the fear in her eyes. He's going to be okay, right? Daddy's really strong. Victoria's heart broke at the child's attempt to be brave. I'm sure he'll be fine. Your dad is tough, and the doctors will take good care of him. But right now, let's get you to the hospital so you can see him. As they drove toward Clearwater General, Mia chatted nervously the way children do when they're trying to distract themselves from worry. She told Victoria about her day at school, about a science project she was working on, about how her daddy had promised to help her build a volcano for the school science fair. He's really good at building things, Mia said proudly. He built me a treehouse last summer, even though we don't have any trees big enough in our yard. He found an old oak tree in the park and asked permission from the city council and everything. Victoria found herself smiling despite her worry. He sounds like a very dedicated father.
Yes.
After Mommy died, lots of people said he should send me to live with my aunt in California. They said it would be easier for him. But Daddy said we were a team, and teams stick together no matter what. The simple loyalty in Mia's voice made Victoria's throat tight with emotion. She thought about her own childhood, spent largely in boarding schools and summer camps while her parents pursued their careers. The idea of a father who would fight to keep his child close, who would work 3 jobs rather than give up custody, was foreign to her experience but deeply moving. Clearwater General Hospital was small but clean, with the kind of personal attention that only came from a facility where everyone knew everyone else. At the front desk, an older nurse named Betty immediately recognized Mia and swept her into a gentle hug. Your daddy's going to be just fine, sweetheart, Betty said soothingly. He's got a broken wrist and some bruises, but nothing that won't heal good as new. Victoria felt relief wash over her. Can we see him? He's in room 12, just down the hall. Fair warning, though, he's pretty groggy from the pain medication they gave him. They found Angelo propped up in a narrow hospital bed, his left arm in a cast from wrist to elbow. His face was pale, and there was a bandage over a cut on his forehead, but his eyes lit up when he saw his daughter. Hey there, little bird, he said, his voice slightly slurred from medication. I heard you had quite an adventure today. Mia climbed carefully onto the bed, nestling against her father's uninjured side. I was scared, she admitted quietly. I know you were. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Angelo's eyes found Victoria over his daughter's head. I'm sorry. You had to get dragged into our drama, Ms. Hartwell. Victoria, she corrected automatically. I wasn't dragged into anything. Mia needed help, and I was glad I could be there for her. Angelo studied her with clearer eyes than his medication should have allowed. You didn't have to do that. Taking care of my kid isn't your responsibility. Hey, Maybe not, Victoria agreed. But it was the right thing to do. The echo of his own words from the highway yesterday wasn't lost on Angelo. He managed a slight smile touche. Dr. Martinez, no relation to Angelo, despite the shared surname, appeared in the doorway, with a clipboard and a reassuring smile. Mr. Martinez, good news. The x-rays confirm it's a clean break. 6 weeks in the cast, and you'll be good as new. 6 weeks? Angelo's face went pale. Doctor, I can't be off work for 6 weeks. I've got jobs to do, bills to pay. I understand. Your concerns, but you need to let this heal properly. Light duty only for at least 2 weeks, then we'll reassess. After the doctor left, Angelo stared at the ceiling with an expression of despair that he tried to hide from his daughter. Victoria could see the calculations running through his head. Lost wages, missed opportunities, bills that wouldn't. Wait for his arm to heal, Daddy. Mia's voice was small. What are we going to do? Angelo's expression immediately shifted, his worry replaced by forced optimism. We'll figure it out, little bird. We'll always do. But Victoria could see the fear in his eyes. It's the same fear she'd seen in her own mirror when the board had first started questioning her decisions. It was the fear of losing everything you'd worked for, of being unable to protect the people you loved. I have an idea, Victoria said suddenly. The words leaving her mouth before she'd fully formed the thought. Both Angelo and Mia looked at her expectantly. I'm between jobs right now, she continued, which was technically true, even if not in the way they would assume. I could help out. Drive Mia to school, pick her up, maybe help with some of the household things that might be difficult with. One arm. Angelo's expression immediately became guarded. That's very kind, but I couldn't ask you to do that. You're not asking, Victoria pointed out. I'm offering. We barely know each other, Angelo protested. So? Yesterday you helped a stranger on the side of the road. Today I helped your daughter when she needed someone. Maybe that's how people get to know each other, by showing up when it matters. Mia looked between the two adults with the shrewd intelligence of a child who understood more than she let on. I like her, Daddy, and Mrs. Henderson is getting too old to chase after me. Angelo sighed, and Victoria could see him struggling between pride and practicality. Finally, he looked at her with an expression that was part gratitude and part wariness. 1 week, he said, until I can manage better with this thing. Gestured to his cast. 1 week, Victoria agreed, though she was already planning to extend that timeline as long as possible, as they prepared to leave the hospital. Mia took Victoria's hand with the casual trust of childhood. Will you really help us? She asked quietly. Victoria squeezed the small hand gently. I promise, she said, and meant it more than she'd meant anything in years. Outside, as Angelo slowly made his way to Victoria's car, leaning heavily on Mia. For support, Victoria's phone buzzed with another urgent message from her assistant. She glanced at it briefly, then deleted it without reading the full text. For the first time in her adult life, the corporate world would have to wait. Victoria's first morning as a temporary caregiver began at 5:30 a.m., with a phone call that jolted her from the deepest sleep she'd had in months. She fumbled for her phone in the unfamiliar darkness of her hotel room, expecting another crisis from her corporate world. Ms. Victoria? Mia's voice was small and worried. Daddy can't get his shirt on, and he's getting really frustrated. Said some words that Mrs. Henderson says are not appropriate for little ears. Victoria smiled despite the early hour. I'll be right there, sweetheart. Can you tell your dad to sit down and stop trying to be Superman for 5 minutes? I heard that, came Angelo's voice from the background, sounding both embarrassed and exasperated 20 minutes later. Victoria stood in the doorway of a small rental house that managed to feel like a home despite its modest size. The living room was dominated by Mia's schoolwork spread across a coffee table, and the walls were covered with her artwork and school photos. Everything was clean but worn, loved but clearly stretched to its limits. Angelo sat on the edge of the couch, shirtless and scowling at his cast as if he could intimidate it into disappearing. His injured arm was swollen and clearly painful, and Victoria could see the frustration etched in every line of his body. This is ridiculous, he muttered. I've been dressing myself for 32 years, and you'll be doing it again in a few weeks. Victoria said pragmatically, picking up the button-down shirt that had been abandoned on the floor. But today you need help. There's no shame in that. Mia appeared from the kitchen wearing pajamas decorated with planets and stars, carrying a bowl of cereal. I told him that, but Daddy doesn't like being taken care of. Most stubborn people don't, Victoria observed, giving Angelo a meaningful look. But sometimes accepting help is harder than giving it. Angelo submitted to having his shirt put on. With the grace of a wild animal being domesticated, clearly uncomfortable with the reversal of roles, Victoria tried to make the process as matter-of-fact as possible. But she couldn't help noticing the small scars on his shoulders and back, evidence of a life spent in physical labor, of risks taken to provide for his family. There, she said. Stepping back once the shirt was buttoned, wasn't so terrible, was it? Speak for yourself, Angelo grumbled, but there was no real heat in his voice. The morning routine that followed gave Victoria a glimpse into a life completely different. From her own? Instead of rushing to catch a helicopter or private jet to some urgent meeting, she found herself helping Mia pack her school lunch, braiding the little girl's hair, and searching for a missing homework assignment that had somehow migrated to the couch cushions. "Do you have kids, Ms. Victoria?" Mia asked as they drove to school in Victoria's Mercedes. She looked even more out of place in the elementary school parking lot than it had the day before. "No," Victoria said simply. "I never found the time." "Sad," Mia said, with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Kids are the best part. Daddy always says I'm his favorite person in the whole world." Victoria glanced in the rearview mirror at the little girl who had so easily accepted her presence in their lives. "I think your daddy is a very smart man," after dropping Mia off. Victoria found herself with several hours to fill before the afternoon pickup. Instead of returning to her hotel or dealing with the increasingly frantic messages from her corporate world, she drove to the Morrison Ranch where Angelo had been injured. The ranch house was a sprawling affair that had clearly seen better decades. But the property was vast and beautiful, stretching toward the mountains like something from a postcard. Victoria found Tom Morrison repairing a fence near the main road, his weathered hands working with the efficiency of long practice. "Must be the lady who's helping Angelo," he said without preamble when she introduced herself. "Heard about what happened? Damned shame. The boy's been through enough without adding a broken arm to the mix." "I wanted to ask about his job," Victoria said. "Will you be able to hold his position while he recovers?" Tom's expression grew troubled. "I wish I could, but I've got a ranch to run and work that can't wait. Angelo knows that. It's nothing personal, but I can't pay a man who can't do the job." Victoria had expected this answer, but it still stung. In her world, injury leave and disability benefits were standard protections. Here, missing work meant missing income, period. "What kind of work was he doing when he fell?" she asked. "Roof repair on the old barn, 60-year-old shingles finally, gave way under him. Lucky he didn't break his neck." Tom paused in his fence work to study Victoria more carefully. "You seem mighty interested in Angelo's welfare for someone who just met him." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He helped me when I needed it. I'm trying to return the favor." Unhung. Tom's expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by her explanation, but he didn't press the issue. "Well, if you're looking to help, Angelo's got skills beyond ranch work. Best carpenter in 3 counties, though he doesn't charge near what he should, pride, you know. Won't take what he thinks is charity." This information sparked an idea in Victoria's mind, but she filed it away for later consideration. She thanked Tom and drove back toward town, her thoughts churning with possibilities. Her phone had been buzzing steadily all morning. And finally, she pulled over to deal with the corporate crisis that seemed determined to intrude on her new reality. Marcus's Webb's voice was tight with stress when she answered. "Victoria, where the hell are you?" The board moved the meeting up again. "They want to see you tomorrow morning, and they're not taking no for an answer." "What's the worst they can do?" Marcus, Victoria asked, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "Fire me? They can destroy your reputation, freeze your assets during the investigation, make it impossible for you to work anywhere in the industry." "Victoria, they're serious about this. You need to get back here and fight." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 2 different worlds pulling her in opposite directions. In one world, she was a corporate executive with millions of dollars in assets and a reputation built over decades of work. In the other, she was a woman learning to braid a little girl's hair and helping a proud man accept assistance he couldn't afford to refuse. "Give me 48 hours, she said finally. Victoria. 48 hours. Marcus. They can't wait that long, then maybe this job isn't worth fighting for." After hanging up, Victoria sat in her car for a long time, staring at the mountains and thinking about choices. She'd spent her entire adult life making decisions based on profit margins and strategic advantage. Now, for the first time, she was being asked to choose between professional survival and something that felt more important, but was much harder to define. When she picked up Mia from school that afternoon, the little girl was bubbling with excitement about a science project assignment. "We have to build something that demonstrates a scientific principle," Mia explained as they drove home. I want to build a helicopter, but Mrs. Peterson says that might be too complicated." "A helicopter?" Victoria asked, intrigued. "Why a helicopter?" "Because they can hover and go straight up and land anywhere they want. I think that's the coolest thing ever. Daddy says maybe someday I'll be smart enough to fly one, but I think I'm smart enough now. I just need someone to teach me." Victoria felt something click into place in her mind. "What if I told you I know something about helicopters?" Mia's eyes went wide in the rearview mirror. "Really? How much do you know?" "Well," Victoria said carefully, "I might know enough to help you with your project." When they arrived home, Angelo was sitting at the kitchen table with a pile of bills spread in front of him, his good hand holding a calculator and his expression grim. He looked up when they entered, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "How was school, little bird?" "Amazing." Mia launched into an explanation of her helicopter project, her enthusiasm infectious despite Angelo's obvious worry about the bills. Victoria watched the interplay between father and daughter, noting how Angelo's expression softened whenever Mia spoke, how he set aside his own concerns to focus completely on her excitement. "Nice. That sounds like a great project, Angelo," said when Mia finished. "We'll figure out how to build something helicopter-like." "Ms. Victoria says she knows about helicopters," Mia announced, and Angelo's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Do you now?" he asked, looking at Victoria with new interest. Victoria felt suddenly self-conscious. She'd been deliberately vague about her background, not wanting to create the kind of distance that wealth and status often imposed. But Mia's project presented an opportunity to share something meaningful without revealing everything. "I've had some experience with aviation," she said, carefully. "Might be able to help with the technical aspects." After Mia went to her room to start her homework, Angelo gestured to the bills scattered across the table. "Sorry about the mess. Just trying to figure out how to juggle things with the reduced income." Victoria glanced at the papers, noting the careful notations in Angelo's handwriting, the way he'd organized everything by due date and priority. Even his financial crisis was managed with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. "The Morrison job?" she asked. Angelo nodded. "Tom can't hold my position." "I understand, but it leaves us in a tight spot. The garage work will help, but I can't do much with one good arm." "What about carpentry work?" "Tom Morrison mentioned you were skilled in that area." Angelo's expression grew guarded. "I do some woodworking in my spare time, but it's not a steady income. And right now, I can't exactly swing a hammer." Victoria had been thinking about this problem all day, and now she saw her opening. "What if I told you I had a project that needed a skilled carpenter? Something that could be done primarily with one hand, at least in the planning and design phases." "What kind of project?" Angelo asked suspiciously. "Well," Victoria said, choosing her words carefully, "I've been thinking about buying some property around here. Maybe building a small retreat, somewhere to get away from the corporate world. I'd need someone to design it, plan the construction, oversee the work when you're back to full capacity." Angelo studied her with those steady gray eyes that seemed to see right through her careful explanations. "You've been here 3 days, and now you want to buy property." "Stranger things have happened," Victoria said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Sometimes a place gets into your blood faster than you expect." The truth was more complicated than that, but it wasn't entirely a lie. Something about this place, about these people, had indeed gotten into her blood. She was just beginning to understand what that might mean. "I couldn't pay you much up front," Angelo said, and Victoria could see him struggling between pride and necessity. "And I don't do charity work." "Good," Victoria replied, "because I don't give charity. I pay fair wages for good work, and from what I've heard, your work is better than good." Angelo was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table as he considered her offer. Finally, he looked up at her with an expression that was part gratitude and part challenge. "All right," he said, "but we do this properly. Contracts, specifications, regular payments." "Deal," Victoria agreed, extending her hand. Angelo shook it with his good hand. And Victoria felt the calluses that spoke of honest work, the strength that came from years of building things that lasted. As their hands touched, she felt something electric pass between them. Connection that had nothing to do with business arrangements and everything to do with the growing attraction neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. That evening, as Victoria helped Mia with her helicopter research, she found herself thinking about the choice she'd been avoiding. Her phone buzzed periodically with messages from her corporate world, each one more urgent than the last. But here, in this small kitchen with a little girl who dreamed of flying and a man who built things with his hands, those urgent crises seemed to belong to someone else's life. "Ms. Victoria?" Mia's voice broke into her thoughts. "When we built my helicopter model, do you think it could really fly?" Victoria looked into those bright, curious eyes and made a decision that would change everything. "Sweetheart," she said, "I think we can do better than a model." The call came at 6:47 a.m., dragging Victoria from dreams filled with mountain skies and a little girl's laughter. "Victoria, they've frozen your accounts. The board filed an emergency injunction, claiming you've been using company resources for unauthorized purposes. They know about helicopters." Victoria sat up in her hotel bed, instantly alert. "What helicopter? Don't play dumb with me. They have flight logs showing you took the company chopper to some podunk town in Montana. They're calling it theft of corporate assets." Victoria's blood ran cold. She had taken Hartwell Aviation's Bell 429 to reach Montana quickly when the crisis first broke, but she'd planned to file the appropriate paperwork retroactively. In the chaos of the past few days, she'd completely forgotten about the administrative details. "Marcus, that's a technicality. I've used company aircraft for business travel hundreds of times, not after being placed on administrative leave." "You haven't." "Victoria, they're building a case for criminal charges. Embezzlement, theft, misuse of corporate property. You need to get back here now or they're going to destroy you." After hanging up, Victoria stared at the ceiling of her generic hotel room, feeling the walls of her carefully constructed life closing in. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built, was being systematically dismantled by people who had once called her friend. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was being accused of stealing a helicopter, contemplating using one to surprise a little girl who dreamed of flying. But as she thought about Mia's excitement over her science project, dignity in the face of financial hardship, about the simple authenticity of their lives, she realized something had fundamentally shifted inside her. The corporate world that had once defined her now felt like a costume she'd grown tired of wearing. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mia. "Daddy says he doesn't feel good." Victoria was dressed and out the door in 10 minutes. She found Angelo in his kitchen, pale and sweating, struggling to open a bottle of prescription pain medication with one hand. His cast was damp with perspiration, and the lines around his eyes spoke of a sleepless night. "Infection," he said simply when he saw her concerned expression. "Doctor said it was a possibility. Antibiotics should knock it out, but I feel like I got hit by a truck." Mia hovered nearby, her usual bright chatter replaced by worried silence. "He threw up twice last night," she whispered to Victoria. "I wanted to call you, but Daddy said not to bother you. You should always call me if you need help," Victoria said firmly, then turned to Angelo. "Have you eaten anything today?" Angelo shook his head. "Can't keep anything down?" Victoria took charge with the efficiency that had made her successful in the corporate world, but applied now to the domestic crisis unfolding before her. She sent Mia to pack an overnight bag, called the school to explain the absence, and coaxed Angelo into letting her drive him back to the hospital. Dr. Martinez confirmed the infection and prescribed a stronger antibiotic, but kept Angelo for observation when his fever spiked to 102 degrees. As they settled into the sterile hospital room, Victoria found herself playing nursemaid to a man who clearly hated being helpless. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Angelo muttered, staring at the 4 drip in his good arm. "Missing more. Work. More bills piling up." "The work will wait," Victoria said, adjusting his pillows. "Now you need to focus on getting better. Easy for you to say. I have a kid depending on you." The comment stung, though. Victoria knew it wasn't meant as an attack. "You're right," she said quietly. "I don't know what that kind of responsibility feels like. But I do know what it's like to feel like you're fighting alone." Angelo looked at her more carefully, noting something in her tone. "Corporate troubles?" Victoria had been carefully avoiding details about her professional life, but sitting here, in this hospital room, watching Angelo struggle with problems that money could easily solve, her secrets felt increasingly heavy. "Something like that," she said, Eve. Fidel Witt clutching her backpack and looking smaller than her 9 years. "Is Daddy going to be okay? He's going to be fine?" Victoria assured her, pulling the little girl into a hug. "But he needs to stay here overnight so the doctors can make sure the medicine is working." "Can I stay too?" Mia asked, and Victoria heard the fear beneath the request. "Hospital policy doesn't allow it, sweetheart," Victoria explained gently. "But you can stay with me tonight. We'll come back first thing in the morning." Angelo started to protest, but Victoria cut him off with a look. "This isn't up for discussion. Mia needs someone to take care of her, and you need to rest without worrying about her." That evening, Victoria found herself in uncharted territory, responsible for a child who wasn't her own, in a small town where she still felt like an outsider. They ordered pizza and worked on Mia's helicopter project at the kitchen table, and Victoria found herself sharing more about aviation than she'd planned. "So, how does a helicopter actually fly?" Mia asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. Victoria pulled out a piece of paper and began sketching the basic principles of rotor mechanics, explaining lift and thrust in terms a 9-year-old could understand. As she drew, she found herself getting caught up in Mia's enthusiasm, remembering her own childhood fascination with flight. "Have you ever been in a real helicopter?" Mia asked. Victoria paused, her pencil hovering over the paper. "A few times."
What?
"It like flying in a glass bubble," Victoria said honestly. "You can see everything below you, and there's this moment when you lift off where the whole world just drops away." Mia's eyes were wide with wonder. "I bet you could see forever from up there." "Sometimes it feels that way," Victoria agreed, thinking about the countless hours she'd spent in corporate helicopters, shuttling between meetings and deals that now seemed insignificant compared to this moment. As they worked on the project, Victoria's phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages from her corporate world. Each notification felt like an intrusion, a reminder of the chaos waiting for her beyond this small kitchen where a little girl dreamed of flying. Finally, Mia looked up from her drawing. "You don't like your phone very much, do you?" Victoria laughed despite herself. "Is it that obvious? You always look sad when it makes noise, like it's telling you something you don't want to hear." The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze Victoria. "Sometimes grown-up problems feel bigger than they really are," she said carefully. "Daddy says problems are like storms," Mia observed, returning to her drawing. "They seem scary when they're happening, but eventually they pass, and everything looks cleaner afterward." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. "Your daddy is a very wise man." Later that evening, after Mia had fallen asleep in the guest bedroom, Victoria sat on Angelo's front porch with a cup of coffee, finally allowing herself to think about the decision she'd been avoiding. Her phone showed dozens of missed calls, urgent emails, and increasingly frantic messages from her legal team. The corporate world was demanding her immediate return, threatening everything she'd worked for if she didn't comply. But as she looked out at the stars, visible in the Montana sky, so much brighter than anything she could see in Denver, she realized that the life she was being asked to fight for no longer felt like her own. Her phone rang, and this time she answered. Victoria, thank God. Marcus's voice was ragged with exhaustion. I've been trying to reach you for hours. They've scheduled a press conference for tomorrow morning. They're going to announce your termination and the pending criminal charges. Let them, Victoria said quietly. What? Victoria? You can't be serious? This is your life we're talking about. Your career, your reputation. No, Marcus. This is their version of my life. I'm starting to think I want to write my own. Victoria, listen to me. Come back to Denver tonight. We can fight this. We can save your company. Victoria looked through the window at the house, where a little girl slept peacefully, trusting that the adults in her life would take care of everything. Tomorrow that little girl would wake up excited about her helicopter project, worried about her father, and confident that Victoria would be there to help with both. I can't, Victoria said simply. I made a promise to a little girl, and for the first time in my adult life, that feels more important than a board meeting. Victoria, handle the press conference however you think best, Victoria interrupted. But I won't be there. After hanging up, Victoria sat in the silence for a long time, thinking about choices and consequences. She was about to lose everything she'd spent her adult life building, but somehow, sitting on this porch in this small town, that loss felt less like a catastrophe and more like a liberation. The next morning brought news that shattered even Victoria's newfound peace. Angelo's fever had broken during the night, but the infection had caused complications that would require surgery to repair damage to the bone. He would be out of work for at least 3 months, possibly longer. Victoria found him in his hospital bed, staring at the ceiling with an expression of defeat she'd never seen before. I can't do this, he said quietly when she entered the room. 3 months without income, medical bills piling up, Mia needing stability I can't provide. Maybe those people were right. Maybe she'd be better off with her aunt in California. Don't. You dare, Victoria said fiercely, surprising them both with her vehemence. That little girl adores you. You're her whole world. Some temporary financial problems don't change that. Temporary. Angelo laughed bitterly. Victoria, you're a nice woman, and I appreciate everything you've done. But you don't understand what it's like to be drowning in debt with no way out. Victoria stared at him, this proud man who had helped her without question, who worked 3 jobs to support his daughter, who was now facing the possible loss of everything that mattered to him. In that moment, she made a decision that would change all their lives. Angelo, she said carefully, what if I told you that money doesn't have to be the deciding factor here? What do you mean? Victoria took a deep breath, knowing that once she spoke the words, there would be no going back. I mean, what if I told you that I'm not just some corporate refugee passing through town? What if I told you that until 3 days ago, I was the CEO of Hartwell Aviation, one of the largest private aviation companies in the country? Angelo stared at her, his expression shifting from confusion to shock to something that might have been betrayal. What if I told you, Victoria continued, her voice gaining strength, that I have helicopters sitting in hangars in Denver, and that if Mia wants to see one fly, I can make that happen? The silence that followed was deafening. Angelo's face had gone pale, and when he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Why are you telling me this now? Because Victoria said, meeting his eyes steadily, I'm about to lose everything I've worked for, and I've discovered I don't care as much as I thought I would. Because watching you and Mia has shown me what really matters. Because that little girl has a science project to finish, and I promise to help her. Angelo was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. When he finally looked at her again, his expression was unreadable. A helicopter, he said slowly. For Mia's project? If you'll let me, Victoria said. If you can trust me, despite the fact that I haven't been completely honest about who I am. Angelo studied her face, looking for something she couldn't name. Finally, he nodded slowly. She's going to lose her mind, he said, and despite everything, he was smiling. The morning of Mia's science presentation dawned crystal clear, the kind of visibility that pilots dream about. Victoria stood in the parking lot of Clearwater Regional Airport at 5:30 a.m. watching as her Bell 429 helicopter was wheeled out of the hangar by a crew she'd flown in from Denver. The machine gleamed white and silver in the early sunlight, its rotors folded back like the wings of a sleeping bird. Ms. Hartwell. The pilot she'd hired, Jake Morrison, no relation to the rancher, approached with a clipboard and a concerned expression. I have to ask one more time, are you sure about this? Landing at an elementary school without proper clearance? With all the corporate legal issues you're facing? This can make things much worse for you. Victoria adjusted her headset and checked the pre-flight inspection one final time. Jake, I appreciate your concern, but I'm pilot on command today. Some things are more important than legal technicalities. You haven't flown solo in over 2 years, Jake reminded her. Are you sure you don't want me to take the controls? I'm currently on my certifications, and this is something I need to do myself. Victoria replied, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. But I want you on board as a safety pilot, just in case. As she ran through the final checklist, Victoria's phone buzzed with a call from Marcus's Webb. She almost ignored it, then decided to answer one last time. Victoria, please tell me you're not about to do something incredibly stupid. Marcus's voice was tight with panic. Define stupid, Victoria replied, watching the sun climb higher over the mountains. The Denver Post just published the story. Aviation CEO accused of corporate theft. It's front page news, Victoria. Your picture is everywhere. And now I'm hearing rumors that you're planning some kind of publicity stunt with a helicopter? Victoria felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She'd known this moment would come, but hearing it confirmed, it still hit like a physical blow. What exactly does the story say? Everything. The frozen accounts, the criminal investigation, the board's accusations. They're painting you as a corporate executive who went rogue, using company resources for personal gain. Victoria, if you land that helicopter at a school today, they'll use it as evidence that you're unstable, that you're doubling down on the very behavior they're accusing you of. Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the choice before her. In one direction lay the safe path: return to Denver, fight the charges, try to salvage what remained of her reputation and career. In the other direction lay the unknown, and a little girl who had been counting down the days until her science presentation. Marcus, she said quietly, what if I told you that I don't care what the Denver Post says about me? Let's say you're having some kind of breakdown. Victoria, this is your life we're talking about. No, Victoria said, looking at the helicopter. That represented both everything she was about to lose and everything she was choosing to gain. This is their version of my life. I'm writing a different story now. She hung up before Marcus could respond and turned to Jake. Are you still willing to fly with me? Jake studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. I've been flying for 20 years, and I've learned to trust my instincts about people. My instincts say you're not the villain they're making you out to be. Thank you, Victoria said simply. The flight to Clearwater Elementary took only 12 minutes. But it felt like a journey between two different worlds. As Victoria piloted the helicopter over the Montana landscape, she found herself thinking about the path that had brought her to this moment. 2 weeks ago, she'd been focused on quarterly reports and board meetings. Now she was risking everything for a little girl's science project and the chance to prove that some things mattered more than corporate politics. Clearwater Elementary School appeared ahead, its modest playground and single-story buildings dwarfed by the vast Montana sky. Victoria could see cars gathering in the parking lot, parents arriving for the science fair presentations. She'd coordinated with Principal Williams, securing permission for the landing through a combination of her pilot credentials and a generous donation to the school's STEM program. As Victoria began her approach, she spotted Angelo standing near the school entrance, his left arm still in a cast but looking stronger than he had in the hospital. Beside him, Mia bounced with excitement, wearing a white lab coat that was too big for her and clutching a poster board covered with helicopter diagrams. Clearwater Elementary. This is November 429 Victoria on final approach, Victoria announced. Over the radio, using her helicopter's tail number modified with her own name, a small act of rebellion that felt surprisingly liberating. The landing was textbook perfect, executed with the precision that came from years of flying in all conditions. As the rotors spun down, Victoria could see a crowd gathering at a safe distance, children pressing against the fence, parents pulling out phones to record the unexpected spectacle, teachers trying to maintain order while clearly as excited. As their students, Victoria shut down the engines and removed her headset. Taking a moment to steady herself before opening the cabin door, as she stepped out, she was immediately struck by the silence, not the sterile quiet of a corporate boardroom, but the expectant hush of a community witnessing something extraordinary. Mia broke free from the crowd and ran toward the helicopter, her face radiant with joy. "Ms. Victoria, you actually did it? You brought a real helicopter to school?" Victoria knelt down to Mia's level, her heart full as she saw the pure wonder in the little girl's eyes. "I told you we could do better than a model. Can I see inside? Can I touch the controls? Oh my gosh. Wait until I tell Jennifer Martinez that I know someone who flies helicopters." Angelo approached more slowly, his expression unreadable. When he reached them, he looked at Victoria with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You came," he said simply. "I keep my promises," Victoria replied. Principal Williams approached with a mixture of excitement and administrative concern. "Ms. Hartwell, this is certainly the most memorable science fair presentation in our school's history. The children are beside themselves." "I hope it's educational," Victoria said. Mia has been working very hard on understanding the principles of flight. For the next hour, Victoria found herself playing the role of science teacher to a group of elementary school children who peppered her with questions about helicopters, aviation, and flight mechanics. Mia served as her assistant, proudly explaining the concepts they'd worked on together and demonstrating her understanding of rotor dynamics with the confidence of a seasoned presenter. "And this is the collective," Mia announced, pointing to the control in Victoria's left hand changes the pitch of all the rotor blades at the same time, which makes the helicopter go up or down. "That's exactly right," Victoria confirmed, noting the impressed murmurs from parents and teachers. Mia clearly understands the complex relationship between lift, thrust, and control inputs. As the presentation continued, Victoria became aware of a commotion near the school entrance. Several cars with press plates had arrived, and she could see photographers with long lenses setting up near the fence. Her heart sank as she realized that her corporate troubles had followed her even here. Angelo noticed the media presence at the same time. "Friends of yours?" he asked quietly. "Unfortunately," Victoria replied, "I'm afraid my professional life is about to intrude on Mia's big day." But before the reporters could get closer, something unexpected happened. The parents and teachers of Clearwater Elementary formed a protective barrier around the helicopter, creating a human shield between the media and the children's presentation. Tom Morrison, whom Victoria recognized from the ranch, stepped forward as an unofficial spokesperson. "This is a school event," he announced to the gathering reporters. "These children are giving science presentations, and we'd appreciate your respect for their educational experience." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes as she watched this small community rally to protect something they saw as important. These people barely knew her. They understood what this moment meant to their children, Mrs. Peterson. Mia's teacher approached Victoria during a brief lull in the questions. "Ms. Hartwell, I hope you know what a gift you've given these children. Today, most of them have never seen a helicopter up close, let alone had the chance to learn from someone with your expertise. The gift is mine," Victoria said honestly. "Teaching Mia about aviation has reminded me why I fell in love with flying in the first place." As the science fair presentations wound down, Victoria found herself facing a moment she'd been dreading. She needed to leave soon. The media attention was growing, and she didn't want to expose Angelo and Mia to the chaos of her corporate troubles any longer than necessary. Angelo seemed to sense her thoughts. "Walk with me," he said quietly. They moved away from the crowd, toward the edge of the playground where they could talk privately. In the distance, Victoria could see reporters trying to get closer, held back by the determined wall of parents and teachers. "Those reporters," Angelo said, "they're here because of your corporate troubles." Victoria nodded. "I'm probably about to become a very public example of what happens when executives go rogue. Landing this helicopter here won't help my case." "Then why did you do it?" Victoria looked back at the helicopter where Mia was still excitedly explaining rotor mechanics to her classmates, 'Cause 2 weeks ago, a stranger stopped to help me when I was broken down on the side of the road. Because his daughter dreams of flying. 'Cause sometimes doing the right thing matters more than protecting yourself. Angelo was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her face. You know, this is going to cost you everything. Maybe, Victoria admitted. But I've learned something these past 2 weeks. Everything I thought was important. The money, the status, the corporate power. None of it means anything if you don't have people you care about to share it with. Victoria, Angelo said, and there was something in his voice that made her heart race. Yes, I need you to know something. These past 2 weeks watching you with Mia, seeing how you've taken care of us when you didn't have to, I've fallen in love with you. Victoria felt the world stop spinning. Angelo, ... I know it's complicated, he continued. I know you're from a different world, and I know you're dealing with things I can't fully understand. But I need you to know before you leave, before this media circus takes you away from us. Victoria stared at him, this proud, gentle man who had shown her what genuine love looked like, who had changed everything about how she saw the world and her place in it. I'm not leaving, she said quietly. What? I'm not leaving, Victoria repeated, her voice growing stronger. I'm done running back to Denver every time they snap their fingers. I'm done caring more about stock prices than science fairs. I'm done living their version of my life. Angelo's expression shifted from surprise to something that looked like hope. What are you saying? Victoria took his good hand in both of hers, not caring that reporters were probably photographing every moment of their conversation. I'm saying that I love you too, she said clearly. I love you, and I love Mia, and I love the life you've shown me is possible. I'm saying that if you'll have me, I want to stay and build something real with you. Angelo's smile was like the sunrise after a long night. Are you sure? 'Cause once you say yes to us, you're stuck with pancakes every Saturday morning and a 9-year-old who's going to want helicopter lessons. That sounds perfect, Victoria said, laughing through her tears. Angelo pulled her closer with his good arm, and as they kissed, Victoria could hear Mia's delighted squeal in the background, followed by the sound of camera shutters clicking rapidly. She didn't care. Let them photograph this moment. Let them write whatever stories they wanted. For the first time in her adult life, Victoria Hartwell was exactly where she belonged. 1 year later, the morning sun painted the Montana sky in shades of gold and rose as Victoria Martinez she'd taken Angelo's name 6 months ago in a simple ceremony at the courthouse, stood on the newly built deck of their home. Watching her husband teach a group of local teenagers the art of precision carpentry, the house itself was a testament to their partnership, designed by Angelo's skilled hands and funded by Victoria's remaining assets after the legal settlements were finalized. The past year had been a whirlwind of change, challenge, and unexpected joy. The corporate legal battle had ended not with criminal charges, but with a settlement that cost Victoria most of her personal wealth, but left her with enough to start over. The media attention had been intense for months, with some outlets painting her as a fallen executive who'd lost everything for love, while others celebrated her as a woman who'd chosen authenticity over corporate success. Mom? Mia's voice called from inside the house, where she was getting ready for school. The transition to calling Victoria Mom had happened gradually, naturally, without fanfare or formal declarations. One day Mia had simply started using the word, and it had felt as right as breathing. Coming, sweetheart, Victoria called back, but she paused for a moment longer on the deck, savoring the sight of Angelo in his element. His cast had come off months ago, and he'd regained full use of his arm. But more importantly, he'd regained something Victoria hadn't even realized he'd lost: the confidence that came from financial security and the knowledge that his family was safe. The carpentry workshop they'd built together had exceeded all expectations. What had started as a way to provide Angelo with steady income had evolved into something much larger, a vocational training center that combined Angelo's practical skills with Victoria's business acumen. They offered classes in everything from basic home repair to advanced woodworking, serving everyone from local teenagers looking for job skills to retirees pursuing new hobbies. Victoria found Mia in the kitchen, struggling with her hair ribbon while simultaneously trying to eat cereal. and review her homework. At 10 years old, she'd grown 3 inches and gained the confidence that came from being the center of a stable, loving family. "Here, let me help," Victoria said, taking over the ribbon duties, while Mia focused on her breakfast. "Don't forget. Today is career day," Mia announced importantly. "Mrs. Henderson is bringing in her grandson who's a firefighter, and Tommy's mom is talking about being a nurse. I told everyone my mom is a pilot and my dad is a master carpenter." Victoria smiled. At the pride in Mia's voice, career day at Clearwater Elementary had become one of her favorite school events. Not just because she enjoyed talking to the children about aviation, but because it represented how completely she'd been accepted into the community. "Are you ready to help me with the presentation?" Victoria asked. "I've got the helicopter model we built and all the diagrams explaining lift and thrust," Mia replied, "plus the photos from when you took me flying last weekend." The flying lessons had become a regular weekend activity. Victoria had purchased a small Robinson R-44 helicopter, nothing as elaborate as the corporate aircraft she'd once commanded, but perfect for teaching and local charter work. Watching Mia's face light up as they soared over the Montana landscape never got old. Angelo appeared in the kitchen doorway, sawdust in his hair and a satisfied expression on his face. "The Henderson boy just mastered his first dovetail joint," he announced proudly. "Kid's got natural talent." "Like father, like teacher," Victoria said, reaching up to brush the sawdust from his hair. The casual intimacy of the gestures still sometimes surprised her how easily they'd learned to navigate the small, daily expressions of love that made a marriage work. "Speaking of teaching," Angelo said, "I got a call from the community college. They want to formalize our partnership. Maybe offer accredited courses through the workshop." This had been Victoria's dream since they'd first started. It's planning the training center, the opportunity to create something that would have lasting impact beyond their small community. With accredited courses, their students could earn certificates that would be recognized throughout the state, opening doors to better employment opportunities. "That's wonderful," Victoria said. "We should celebrate." "How about dinner at Giuseppe's?" Angelo suggested. Mia's been wanting to try their new pizza. As they discussed plans for the evening, Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message. Glanced at it, expecting something routine, but instead saw a message from Jake Morrison, the pilot who'd flown with her on that pivotal day at the elementary school. "Thought you'd want to see this?" the message read. It's followed by a link to an article in Aviation Weekly. Victoria opened the link and felt her breath catch. The headline read, "From Boardroom to Workshop, How Victoria Martinez is Revolutionizing Vocational Education in Rural America." The article featured photos of their training center, interviews with students whose lives had been changed by the programs they offered, and quotes from local business owners praising the quality of graduates from their courses. "Good news?" Angelo asked, noticing her expression. Victoria showed him the article, watching his face light up as he read. "They want to feature our model in a national education conference," she said. "Apparently what we're doing here is being seen as a template for other rural communities." "Look at this," Angelo said, pointing to a quote from one of their students. "Maria Santos says our welding program helped her get a job at the Morrison Ranch that pays twice what she was making at the diner." The success stories had been accumulating steadily, and people who might have left Montana in search of opportunity were now finding careers close to home. Adults who'd been laid off from failing industries were retraining for new fields. Retirees were discovering skills they'd never had time to pursue. "We did this," Victoria said quietly, looking around the kitchen that had become the heart of their life together. "What? We actually did this." "We did," Angelo agreed, pulling her into his arms. "Though I have to admit, when I stopped to help a stranded motorist on Highway 27, I never imagined it would lead to this," Victoria laughed, remembering that day that seemed like a lifetime ago. "I was so lost that day, I thought my life was falling apart." "Maybe it was," Angelo said thoughtfully. "Maybe it had to fall apart so you could build something better." The truth of his words resonated deeply with Victoria. The corporate life she'd lost had felt important at the time, but it had also been hollow in ways she hadn't recognized until she'd experienced something real. The work she did now, teaching young people, building community programs, Using her aviation skills to provide emergency medical transport for rural areas felt more meaningful than anything she'd accomplished in the boardroom as they prepared. To leave for school, Victoria caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. She looked different than she had a year ago, less polished perhaps, but more alive. Her hair was shorter now, practical for someone who spent time in workshops. And aircraft hangars? Her clothes were more casual, chosen for comfort and durability rather than impression. But her eyes held a light that had been missing for years. The drive to Clearwater. Elementary took them past familiar landmarks that had become dear to Victoria over the past year. The Henderson Feed and Hardware Store, where Dolores still reigned. Behind the counter, and never failed to ask about their latest projects, Miguel's garage, where she still took her car for service, and where Miguel still insisted on giving her family discount rates. The Morrison Ranch, where Angelo occasionally did consulting work, and where Victoria sometimes provided helicopter transport for veterinary emergencies at the school. They were greeted by Principal Williams, whose warm smile had become one of Victoria's favorite sights. "Our celebrity aviator returns," she said with genuine affection. The children have been talking about Career Day for weeks. Victoria's presentation had evolved considerably from that first impromptu science lesson. Beside her helicopter, she brought photo displays showing different types of aviation careers, hands-on demonstrations of flight principles, and always, weather permitting, a short helicopter ride for the student with the most insightful questions as she set up her display in the gymnasium. Victoria was approached by Sarah Chen, a senior at Clearwater High School, who'd been attending weekend aviation workshops at the training center. "Ms. Martinez," Sarah said excitedly, "I got accepted to the aviation program at Montana State. The admissions counselor said my letter of recommendation from you really helped." Victoria felt the familiar surge of pride that came from watching young people pursue their dreams. "That's wonderful, Sarah. You've earned it with all your hard work. I wanted to ask you something," Sarah continued, lowering her voice. "My little brother David is in the 4th grade here. He's always been interested in building things, but he's really shy. Would you maybe mention the workshop programs during your presentation? He's too nervous to ask questions, but I know he'd love to learn carpentry from Mr. Martinez." Victoria nodded, making a mental note to watch for David during her presentation. This was one of the things she loved most about their new life, the way opportunities to help seemed to present themselves naturally. The way their work rippled outward through the community in ways they couldn't have planned. The Career Day presentations began with the firefighter, whose dramatic stories of rescues and emergency response had the children wide-eyed with excitement. The nurse followed with a more gentle presentation about helping people heal and the importance of medical care in rural communities. When Victoria's turn came, she found herself facing a gymnasium full of eager faces, including Mia's proud smile, from the front row. But instead of launching into her usual presentation about aviation careers, Victoria found herself thinking about the larger story, the way that day on Highway 287 had led to everything good in her current life. "How many of you have ever had something break down when you really needed it to work?" she began, and nearly every hand in the room went up. "That's how I met Mia's dad," Victoria continued. And she saw Angelo's surprised smile from where he stood along the wall. "My car broke down on a lonely highway, and I was stuck and scared and didn't know what to do. But Mr. Martinez stopped to help me, even though he didn't know me and I couldn't pay him for his time." The children listened with rapt attention as Victoria told them about kindness and community, about how helping others often helps ourselves in ways we can't predict. She talked about the importance of learning skills that could help your neighbors, about the satisfaction that came from building things that lasted, about the way that following your heart could lead to adventures you never imagined. So yes, she concluded, "I'm here to talk about aviation careers because flying is something I love. But I'm also here to tell you that the most important career you can have is the career of being a good person. Someone who helps others when they're in trouble." During the question and answer session, Victoria made sure to call on David Chen, Sarah's shy younger brother. "What would you like to build?" she asked him gently. Maybe ... maybe houses," David said quietly, "so people have safe places to live." "That's a wonderful goal," Victoria said. "Mr. Martinez, Mia's dad, teaches carpentry and construction skills at our workshop. Maybe your parents could bring you some time to see what we do there." As the presentations wrapped up, Victoria found herself surrounded by children asking about helicopter rides, flight lessons, and when they could visit the workshop. But the moment that touched her most deeply came when Mrs. Peterson, Mia's teacher, from the previous year, approached with tears in her eyes. "I need to thank you," Mrs. Peterson said quietly. "What you and Angelo have built here, it's changing this community. My nephew graduated from your welding program last month and got a job with the power company. My neighbor's daughter is learning aviation mechanics. You're giving these kids hope that they can have good careers without leaving home." That evening, as they sat around the dinner table at Giuseppe's, now expanded to include Sarah Chen, who would become like a second daughter to them, Victoria reflected on the unexpected path that had brought them to this moment. Angelo reached across the table to take her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "Penny, for your thoughts," he said softly. "Just thinking about how one broken tire changed everything," Victoria replied. Mia looked up from her pizza with the wisdom that sometimes surprised Victoria. "Maybe it wasn't really broken," she said thoughtfully. "Maybe it was just waiting for the right person to fix it." Angelo laughed. "When did you get so philosophical, little bird?" "Since I got the smartest parents in Montana," Mia replied matter-of-factly, causing both Victoria and Angelo to laugh. Later that night, after Mia had gone to bed and Sarah had been driven home, Tori and Angelo sat on their deck under a sky full of stars that seemed impossibly bright after a lifetime of city living. In the distance, they could hear the gentle hum of the workshop's ventilation system and see the lights from the small apartment above it, where Jake Morrison now lived, serving as their night security and maintenance coordinator. "Any regrets?" Angelo asked, following her gaze toward the workshop they'd built together. Victoria considered the question seriously. A year ago, she'd been wealthy beyond most people's dreams, powerful in corporate circles, respected in her industry. Now she was living in a small Montana town, running a vocational training center, flying medical transport missions for a fraction of her former salary. "Only one?" she said finally. Angelo raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "I regret that I didn't get a flat tire on Highway 287 sooner," Victoria said, turning to smile at her husband. "I could have had this life years ago if I'd been smart enough to know what I was looking for." Angelo pulled her closer and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of their chosen home. Tomorrow would bring new students to the workshop, new challenges to solve, new opportunities to help their community grow and thrive. But tonight, Victoria Martinez was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of a man who had shown her what love looked like, in a place where her work mattered, surrounded by a community that had welcomed her with open hearts. She'd lost a corporate empire, but gained something infinitely more valuable, a life built on purpose, connection, and the kind of love that could fix anything that was truly broken. In the distance, a coyote called to the moon, and Victoria smiled, thinking about all the beautiful, unexpected ways that life could surprise you when you were brave enough to let it. 5 years had passed since that fateful day on Highway 287, and Victoria Martinez stood at the podium of the Montana State Capitol, addressing a joint session of the legislature about rural economic development. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who had once fled corporate boardrooms was now advocating for policy changes that could transform communities across the state. "Honorable legislators," Victoria began, her voice carrying the confidence that came from years of genuine accomplishment. "I stand before you today, not as a former CEO or corporate executive, but as someone who has witnessed firsthand the power of investing in people over profit margins." In the gallery above, Angelo sat with 14-year-old Mia, who was now taller than her adoptive mother and showed every sign of inheriting both parents' determination and intelligence. Beside them sat Jake Morrison, who had become not just their business partner, but family, and Sarah Chen, now a licensed pilot working for their expanded aviation services company. The presentation Victoria was giving represented the culmination of years of quiet work, building coalitions and demonstrating results. The Brooks Martinez Rural Skills Institute, they'd renamed it to honor, Angelo's late uncle, who had taught him carpentry, had become the model for similar programs in 17 communities across Montana, North Dakota, and Wyoming. When we talk about rural brain drain, Victoria continued, clicking to a slide showing employment statistics, we're not just talking about numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about young people like Maria Santos, who was ready to leave Montana forever until she discovered she had a gift for precision welding. We're talking about veterans like David Foster, who found purpose again through our aerospace maintenance program. The slides that followed showed faces Victoria knew personally, students who had become teachers, apprentices who had started their own businesses, teenagers who had discovered passions they never knew existed. Each success story represented not just individual transformation, but ripple effects that strengthened entire communities. The traditional model tells us that economic development requires large corporations and massive infrastructure investments. Victoria said, her passion evident in her voice. But what we've learned is that sustainable, rural prosperity grows from the ground up. One skilled worker at a time, one small business at a time, one community partnership at a time. After the presentation, Victoria was surrounded by legislators, policy advocates, and journalists who wanted to know more about their model. But the person she was most eager to see was Senator Patricia Whitehorse, the chair of the Rural Development Committee, who had become both a political ally and personal friend. Outstanding work as always, Senator Whitehorse said, pulling Victoria aside. I've got 6 more communities asking for feasibility studies, and the Federal Education Committee wants to hear your testimony next month? Victoria nodded, but part of her attention was on Angelo, who was helping Mia navigate the crowd of adults who wanted to meet the helicopter girl who had inspired her mother's career change. At 14, Mia had inherited Victoria's love of aviation and Angelo's practical engineering mind, creating a combination that had already attracted attention from aerospace programs at several universities. I appreciate all the opportunities, Victoria said to Senator Whitehorse, but I need to make sure we're not expanding too fast. Each program needs time to develop its own character, its own community connections. This had become Victoria's constant balancing act, leveraging their success to help other communities while ensuring they didn't lose. The personal touch that made their original program special. She'd seen too many good ideas fail because they prioritized growth over sustainability. The drive back to Clearwater took them through a landscape that had become as familiar as breathing. Victoria found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that first desperate phone call when Angelo was injured to today's triumph at the state capitol. Mom, Mia said from the back seat. Using the tablet Victoria had bought her for advanced mathematics courses. I've been working on the calculations for my senior project proposal. At 14, Mia was already taking college-level courses through the community college partnership Angelo and Victoria had established. Her senior project, still 2 years away but already consuming her thoughts, involved designing a helicopter modification that could improve medical emergency response in rural areas. What kind of calculations? Angelo asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. Weight distribution for medical equipment installation, fuel efficiency modifications, landing zone requirements for different terrain types. Mia rattled off with the casual expertise of someone who had grown up around both aviation and engineering discussions. Victoria smiled, remembering her own teenage fascination with flight mechanics. But where Victoria had pursued aviation as an escape from family expectations, Mia was approaching it as a tool for community service, a reflection of the values she'd absorbed from both her parents. Have you thought about your summer internship plans? Victoria asked. They'd established a program that allowed advanced students to spend summers working with aerospace companies, emergency services, or engineering firms, giving them real-world experience before college. Actually, Mia said, looking up from her tablet with an expression that Victoria had learned meant she'd been planning something significant. I want to spend the summer working with Dad on the new workshop expansion. Angelo raised an eyebrow. Expansion's going to be a lot of physical labor, little bird. You sure you want to spend your summer swinging hammers and moving lumber? Dad, I'm going to be an aerospace engineer. I need to understand how things are actually built, not just how they look on paper. Besides, Mia grinned. Someone needs to make sure you and Jake don't hurt yourselves trying to install the new crane system. Victoria laughed, recognizing her own pragmatic streak in her daughter's reasoning. Mia had inherited the best of both: parents Angelo's hands-on wisdom and Victoria's strategic thinking, but had developed her own unique perspective that combined technical excellence with social consciousness. The new workshop expansion Mia mentioned represented their latest ambitious project. With funding from a combination of state grants, private donations, and their own reinvested profits, they were building a full aerospace maintenance facility that would serve both their educational mission and provide critical services for rural aviation needs. Speaking of the expansion, Angelo said, Tom Morrison called this morning. The county approved our proposal for the emergency medical helicopter base. We should be operational by next spring. This had been Victoria's dream project for the past 2 years, establishing a rural emergency medical service that could reach isolated communities within the golden hour that often meant the difference between life and death. The service would be staffed by graduates of their aviation program and supported by the maintenance facility they were building. That's wonderful, Victoria said, feeling the familiar satisfaction that came from seeing long-term plans come to fruition. How many communities will we be able to serve? The initial coverage area includes 12 towns and 3 tribal reservations, Angelo replied, plus backup support for the existing services in Billings and Great Falls. As they drove through downtown Clearwater, Victoria marveled at the changes 5 years had brought. The main street that had once shown signs of economic decline now bustled with activity. The old movie theater had been renovated into a community center, so new restaurants had opened, along with an expanded medical clinic and a small hotel that catered to visitors attending programs at the Institute. Look, Mia said, pointing toward the elementary school, where a familiar white and silver helicopter sat on the playground. Someone's doing a career day presentation. Victoria smiled, recognizing the aircraft as belonging to Sarah Chen, who now ran the educational outreach program for their aviation services. Sarah's turn to inspire the next generation. The tradition of helicopter visits to local schools had evolved into a formal program that reached communities throughout the region. Victoria still participated occasionally, but she'd been deliberately stepping back from the spotlight, allowing younger instructors and graduates to take leadership roles. At home, the house Angelo had designed, and they'd built together on a hill overlooking the valley, Victoria found herself in her favorite spot, the kitchen island, where she'd spent countless hours over the years helping Mia with homework, planning business strategies with Angelo, and hosting informal gatherings of staff, students, and community members. Tonight's gathering was smaller than usual, just family plus Jake and Sarah, who had both become integral parts of their extended clan. The conversation ranged from Mia's latest academic achievements to Jake's plans for expanding their charter flight services, but eventually settled on a topic that had been on Victoria's mind for weeks. I've been thinking about writing a book, Victoria said, the words surprising her as much as anyone else at the table. Angelo looked up from the financial reports he'd been reviewing. What kind of book? About all of this? Victoria gestured around them, encompassing not just their home, but everything they'd built together. About how a flat tire can change your life, about what happens when you stop measuring success by stock prices and start measuring it by the people you help. Sarah leaned forward with interest. You mean like a business book? About rural economic development? Partly, Victoria said, but more personal than that. About the choices we make, about what really matters, about how love can be the most practical thing in the world. Mia looked up from her engineering textbook with the shrewd intelligence that reminded Victoria daily of how quickly her daughter was growing up. You mean about how you and Dad met? That's part of it, Victoria agreed. But it's really about how we all met, how our lives intersected and created something bigger than any of us could have built alone. Jake nodded thoughtfully. There's a lot of people who could learn from what you've done here. Not just the business model, but the whole approach to community and family and finding purpose. Victoria had been contacted over the years by publishers, journalists, documentary filmmakers interested in telling their story. She'd always declined, partly from natural privacy, and partly because she'd been too busy living the story too. Step back and analyze it. But lately, she'd been thinking about legacy, about the wisdom they'd accumulated that might help others facing similar crossroads. What would you call it? Angelo asked, setting aside his papers to give her his full attention. Victoria considered the question, thinking about the journey that had brought them from that dusty highway to this moment. Maybe something simple, like the flat tire, or fixed. How about what really matters? Mia suggested. Because that's what the whole story is about, right? Figuring out what's actually important instead of what other people tell you should be important. The conversation continued as they cleaned up from dinner, each person contributing ideas and memories, building on each other's thoughts in the way that had become natural for their unconventional family. Victoria found herself thinking about how many similar conversations they'd had over the years, how their kitchen table had become a place where dreams were born and plans were made. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Victoria and Angelo sat on their deck as they had so many times before, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. 5 years of shared life had deepened their connection into something that felt both comfortable and continuously surprising. "Do you think we've done enough?" Victoria asked, voicing a question that had been weighing on her mind as opportunities for expansion continued to present themselves. Angelo considered her question seriously, as he always did. Enough for what? For the community, for the people we set out to help, for the example we wanted to set. Angelo reached for her hand, his fingers still showing the calluses of honest work despite his increasing focus on program management and teaching. "Victoria, 5 years ago this town was slowly dying. Young people were leaving. Businesses were closing. Hope was in short supply. Look at it now." Victoria followed his gesture toward the lights of Clearwater spread out below them. A community that had welcomed her during her darkest hour had flourished, not just economically, but in terms of spirit and possibility. "But there's so much more we could do," Victoria said. "The federal testimony, the expansion opportunities, the communities that are asking for help." "There will always be more to do," Angelo replied gently. "The question is whether we're doing it for the right reasons. Are we expanding because communities genuinely need what we offer, or because success has momentum of its own?" This was the wisdom Victoria had learned to trust over their years together. Angelo's ability to cut through complexity and focus on essential truths. It was the same quality that had made him stop for a stranger on the highway, that had made him risk trusting someone from a completely different world. "I love you," Victoria said suddenly, the words carrying the weight of 5 years of shared challenges, celebrations, and quiet daily kindnesses. "I love you too," Angelo replied, pulling her closer. "All of you, the corporate executive, the pilot, the teacher, the woman who's still figuring out how to braid a teenage girl's hair." Victoria laughed, thinking about the learning curve that had come with sudden parenthood, with small town life, with building a business that prioritized people over profits. "I'm still figuring out most of it." "That's what makes it interesting," Angelo said. "Besides, Mia's got most of the important stuff handled. She's going to change the world." "That one. She already is," Victoria agreed. Thinking about their daughter's combination of technical brilliance and social conscience, about the young woman she was becoming under their guidance and example, as they sat in comfortable silence, Victoria heard the distant sound of a helicopter approaching, probably Sarah returning from an evening medical transport. The sound that had once represented corporate power and privilege now meant something entirely different: community service, emergency response, and the dreams of young people learning to fly. "Angelo," Victoria said as the helicopter's lights disappeared toward the landing pad they'd built near the Institute. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gotten that flat tire?" Angelo was quiet for a moment, considering alternate histories that would never be known. "I think we would have found each other somehow," he said finally. "Maybe not that day, maybe not that way, but somehow. Some connections are too important to leave to chance." Victoria smiled in the darkness, thinking about destiny and choice, about the way love could disguise itself as coincidence until you looked back and saw the pattern that had always been there. "Maybe," she agreed, "but I'm glad it happened the way it did. I'm glad you were the one who stopped to help." "Best flat tire in history," Angelo said, and Victoria could hear the smile in his voice. Later, as Victoria checked on Mia before going to bed, she found her daughter reading by lamplight, absorbed in an advanced aerodynamics textbook that would have challenged most college students. "Lights out soon, sweetheart," Victoria said softly. Mia looked up with eyes that held both Angelo's steadiness and Victoria's determination. "Mom, when you write your book, will you make sure to tell people that the most important thing isn't what breaks down, but who shows up to help fix it?" Victoria felt her heart swell with pride and love for this remarkable young woman they were raising together. "I think that might be the perfect ending," she said. As Victoria finally settled into bed beside Angelo, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment of peace and purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve their community and expand their impact. But tonight she was simply grateful for the flat tire that had changed everything, for the man who had stopped to help, and for the life they'd built together from the foundation of authentic love and shared purpose. Outside their window, Montana night was vast and star-filled. Holding infinite possibilities for the future, they would continue to build together. One day at a time, one act of service at a time, one moment of love at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.